a.m. Good morning. It's 10 a.m. on Tuesday, November 17th, 2020, and this is 10 on Tuesdays. Today we have two guests, Chad Paulson and Scott Peterson from Avalara, and they're here to talk about multi-state tax solutions and certified service providers. I'm Holly Hoffman, owner of the Sales and Income Tax Advisory Network. Prior to creating my company, I worked for the Wisconsin Department of Revenue as an auditor, speaker, and sales tax specialist. My passion is to help provide sales tax education and support to tax professionals, businesses, and associations with the goal of building a network of empowered taxpayers. For more information, visit salesandincometax.com. Thank you for joining my web chats, 10 on Tuesdays, every Tuesday from 10 to 10:30 a.m. You can check out previous episodes on my 10 on Tuesdays channel. To find my channel, go to salesandincometax.com, look for the 10 on Tuesdays logo. You can click the logo to register for the webinars or click on watch previous episodes to access the 10 on Tuesdays channel. So now that we got done with business there, I want to formally introduce, we have Scott Peterson. He's the VP and Government Relations for Avalara, and then Chad Paulson, Principal Tax Analyst for Avalara, and I appreciate you guys joining me. Scott, your background is you used to be the Executive Director of the Streamlined Sales Tax Governing Board, and you just told me that you worked for the South Dakota Department of Revenue for 10 years. So can you tell us a little bit about your background and what you do?
Sure. Thank you. Good morning, Holly. Good morning, Chad. It's nice to hear you guys. So I started my career in tax accidentally, I got a job working in the South Dakota legislature. I went to college to be a city manager, couldn't find a damn job in city management. Legislature had an opening, they hired me, showed up first day of work, nobody wanted to do tax, so the boss turned around and he said, well, you're a tax guy. I, of course, didn't know anything about tax. And I spent a lot of years studying and working really hard to figure that out, helping legislators change tax policy. And then I was hired to be the director of the South Dakota sales tax. So I was the chief administrator of the state sales tax for 10 years. And in that, we started the streamlined sales tax with Diane Hart, the tax administrator from Wisconsin, who is in the world of tax administration and economic nexus and remote sales. Diane Hart is the founding creator of all of this. And so as Streamline developed, they were looking for an executive director, and they approached me, and I said, yep, I've been 10 years with the Department of Revenue. It was time to do something different. Did that for 7 years. And 8 years ago, last Thursday, I started with Avalara, and I do government relations, which is kind of a nebulous title, but I mostly build relationships with states, and I do lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of presentations on taxes.
Yes, you can't get enough of the tax presentations.
Apparently you can't.
No. And Chad, I just want to get a little bit of your background. I know you also have been involved in the Streamlined Sales Tax Governing Board, and you're a former Minnesota Department of Revenue employee, but can you tell us a little bit about your background and what you do?
Sure. Thanks for having us. I joined Avalara 2.5 years ago, and prior to that, I was with the Minnesota Department of Revenue, specifically in the sales tax division for 10 plus years. So I have had my fair share of studying the tax laws myself, not only for Minnesota, but the surrounding states. And along with that, I came over to Avalara when the opportunity was presented, and I now work specifically on our Streamlined Sales Tax team here at Avalara, representing Avalara at the Streamlined Sales Tax Governing Board, along with Scott Peterson here, and am involved in all of the committees that the Streamlined Sales Tax program has.
Wonderful. So before we get in over people's heads, I would like to start with Scott and have you give us a little intro about Wayfair decision and the impact it's had on multi-state tax, if you don't mind.
I don't mind at all. Thank you. It's Still to this day, 2.5 years later, I'm still dumbfounded by that decision. Because that wasn't what the states had envisioned. The states truly had envisioned a negotiated settlement with the business community that would be created by Congress, that there would be this congressional act that granted states authority with lots and lots and lots of conditions. And I spent 10 years lobbying Congress as the representative or one of the representatives of the states to get that concept accomplished. And then all of a sudden, that just kind of, I wouldn't say it fell apart, but it became less realistic. And oddly enough, the courts became more realistic when the Supreme Court gave its opinion in Roe versus DMA, the Colorado use tax reporting statute. In that opinion, in that decision, one of the justices said, we're having this conversation today because of the National Bell Assess decision in 1967, which we should try to review. And the justice said he encouraged the bar to bring another case to the Supreme Court so they could evaluate the National Bell Assess decision in 1967 and the Quill decision in 1992. The states took that as a real opportunity, and they just jumped all over it. And so they hired a law firm to help them write a statute that would minimize the risk of losing and maximize the speed in which a decision could be reached. And South Dakota was the first one to get that adopted. And off to the races they went. It's a strange statute. Their statutes had it was like a 3-page long piece of legislation, excuse me. One section applied to sales tax. All the rest of that law was around the process to get that law, that one statute, before the United States Supreme Court. So they put all kinds of stuff in there that, facilitated the state courts finding it unconstitutional. Actually, the strange law. Legislatures enact unconstitutional legislation all the time. Sometimes they know it, sometimes they have not a clue. This time they knew it, and they said it. In that law, it said, this law is unconstitutional, and we expect you to find it so. And so they directed their own court system to find their law unconstitutional, which is what they wanted to do, because they knew that's how they would get this thing through their state system, which it had to do before it could get to the federal system. But their law is very simple. It simply is that if you make more than $100,000 in gross sales into South Dakota in a calendar year, or have 200 or more separate transactions in a calendar year, you have an obligation to collect their sales tax. And so the Supreme Court gets this case. They surprise everybody. They don't agree with South Dakota. They never did say that South Dakota's law was constitutional. What they said was, the decision that we made in 1967 in National Bell Assess versus Illinois was wrongly decided. And they overturned their previous decision in that case, and where they affirmed it in 1972 or 1992 in the Quill decision. So left the states in a bit of a quandary. They didn't actually say South Dakota's law was constitutional. So what do I do? So every state in the country did exactly, in theory, exactly what South Dakota did. They all adopted a statute that said if you make more than X number of sales in the state or X number of transactions in the state, you have to collect sales tax. All of that would have been perfectly rational based upon the Supreme Court's decision, had they not all decided to be just slightly different than South Dakota. So North Dakota, $100,000 in taxable sales, no transactions. California, $500,000 in sales. Connecticut, $250,000 in sales and 100 transactions. So we've got now 40, the only states with the sales tax that don't have this law are Missouri and Florida. Every other state in the country has this law. So every retailer in the United States every retailer in the world that's making sales into every state in the country except Missouri and Florida has to look at their sales volume to know whether or not they have an obligation to collect the state sales tax somewhere. And then they adopted all these marketplace facilitators. The states have been trying for a very long time to get the big marketplaces to collect sales tax not only in their own sales but on the sales they facilitate of others. And so they're using the Wayfair decision to get that done as well. And every state in the country has that except Missouri and Florida, which have nothing, and Kansas. Kansas doesn't have the marketplace facilitator law either.
Now, did Kansas originally didn't have any small seller exception, meaning any level, even if you didn't have presence in Kansas, any amount of sales into Kansas required you to be registered and collect sales tax. Is that correct?
That is correct, and that's still the case. They're the one state in the country that did this by regulation. Oh, well, that's not, yeah, regulation. They have a statute that was adopted in 1988 that is extremely broad. It's in their use tax, and it's extremely broad. It requires anybody who's doing anything at all in Kansas to collect their use tax. Well, of course, they've never been able to enforce that law until the Wayfair decision. Then they couldn't get the legislation, the governor couldn't agree on what to do. And the department said, well, we've got this whole law, we could just interpret that to be a Wayfair law, and that's what they did. But what they couldn't do what that law didn't have is a de minimis. So there was no threshold. And they said that is effectively an exemption, and the Department of Revenue can, broadly interpret an imposition, but they can't create an exemption.
And, you talked about the different thresholds in each of the states, so they didn't really follow South Dakota's law. But then also in addition to that, one of the holdups for some type of national sales tax legislation was the small seller exception, the reasonableness and the impact on smaller sellers to be able to manage multi-state tax laws. And the South Dakota, what they offered was that they're a streamlined state, that they would have the economic threshold and the transaction threshold to protect those smaller sellers. Not every state who accepted and moved forward with this economic nexus they're not all streamlined states. So that's another issue that makes it a little interesting.
And that's a great point. South Dakota, if you read the brief that they submitted to the Supreme Court in defense of their law, they spent a long time talking about the streamlined sales tax. Mm-hmm. And they talked about the uniform definitions that all the states have, the uniform processes, the uniform return, a single point of registration, and they talked about certified service providers. And they said, wait a minute, we're here to argue today that there is no cost to a remote seller collecting the South Dakota sales tax under this law, because we pay certified service providers to do that for them. And to the extent that they are capable of, fitting in with the certified service provider environment, there shouldn't be an expense to them whatsoever.
Okay, this is a great segue. Before I move on, I want to talk about, you mentioned certified service providers, and I'm going to have Chad explain what that is. But before we get to that, you were talking about multi-state tax, the marketplace legislation, the economic nexus. So I am showing on my screen Avalara, a page from Avalara. If you go to avalara.com under resources, it has, well, maybe I should let you explain it, Scott.
Okay, thank you. No, I appreciate it. So yeah, under resources on our website, avalara.com, we have just about everything that one could wonder about what triggers a responsibility to collect sales tax in a state with a sales tax. So if you were to click on the resources tab, you'd come to several pages where you can look to see whether, and it's all by state, you can look to see whether or not the state has, an economic nexus law like South Dakota's or a marketplace facilitator law. You can look to see whether they have click-through legislation, whether they have a use tax reporting legislation, all the different things that the states have tried over the years. We have all there on those resource pages, and so it's relatively easy to. And if you have a question about Idaho, you can go to that page. You can see, oh, Idaho has Wayfair, Idaho has marketplace facilitators, Idaho has click-through nexus, and it's a great resource. I use it all the time.
Yes, very good. So Chad, we've kind of segued into what I wanted to ask you about, and that is, I talk about CSPs or certified service providers. Can you discuss what a certified service provider is and basically how that works?
Sure. So a certified service provider, otherwise known as a CSP, is a company that has been certified by the Streamlined Sales Tax Governing Board and can carry out the responsibilities of a CSP, the contractual responsibilities of a CSP with the participating states. As you know, there are 24 participating states, and Avalara is one of the first CSPs to be certified, and that goes back to 2005. And every 3 years, a CSP goes through a recertification process with the governing board to make sure that they're adhering to the CSP contract. The CSP contract with the states essentially says, to what Scott mentioned before, that the states in turn pay the CSPs to provide services on behalf of businesses to collect and remit the appropriate amount of tax. So the states pay the CSPs a percentage of the tax collected, and that's how the CSPs are able to provide services free of charge to the customers.
And this is good for the states, having worked for a Department of Revenue. This is good for the states because compliance is more revenue. So getting people to businesses to comply and remit tax is good business. That's why they would give a percentage back of the tax collected, correct?
Correct, and that goes along with the confidence and accuracy that has been determined throughout the certification process with the CSPs. And essentially the states, for lack of better words, are comfortable with all of the taxability that they have certified. And speaking to the taxability, Avalara has 2,500 plus tax codes that customers can map to, and those tax codes are SST certified, which means that the SST states have taken a look at the content built behind our tax codes and essentially blessed those and said those are accurate and correct. So there's a few benefits to joining the program. You would get free registrations in 24 states. You would get access to boundary and rule data that the state has provided and blessed. You would get free tax calculation software. You get one uniform tax identification number to file your taxes in all 24 states. So instead of having 24 different ID numbers that were issued by the state, you would get one streamlined sales tax identification number that works amongst all of the 24 states.
Nice.
And then also you get free preparation and filing of your sales and use tax returns, and uniform filing forms and exemption certificates. We, in our SST program, have set up some requirements for our customers to be successful in the program, such as you have to pass all kinds of data, essentially, including item descriptions and exemption certificate information in order to adhere to the program requirements. And then also you would get free audit support with all these 24 states if you were in the SST program. And essentially that means that Avalara acts as your audit liaison between the state and the customer themselves. And then last but not least, we also offer notice resolution as part of the SST program. And then in the event that you would need to file any amendments, we would file amendments free of charge on your behalf.
Nice. So it's basically full service. And now we talk about certified service provider, and that's the 24 states. But beyond that, folks that are doing business in states outside of that could still use Avalara for that. It just they would have to pay for that, correct?
That would be correct, Allie.
Yeah. And
Holly,
really, yeah, go ahead.
The one exception is Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, while it didn't join Streamline, it adopted the CSP portion of Streamline. And so they've certified us just like the SST states do, and they also pay us. So effectively, there's 25 states in where the states will pay the certified service provider to do this for you.
And we're hoping that people pressure other states to join and do the same to make it easier for individuals. And I'm sure DORs across the US would love that, higher compliance. So some of the questions that I received from folks about this is that, well, they're just not familiar with economic nexus still. And this whole pandemic really took the focus off of this change. And we really felt that this year would be a year of enforcement following up on this, since the Wayfair decision was implemented in 2018. Now we're in 2020. But with the pandemic, that really didn't happen. So now we're looking at possibly in 2021 more enforcement. And people are kind of on edge of what that level of enforcement will be now that states are down on revenue. How do you guys feel about that? What is your outreach, or what's your message to businesses who make sales in other states, and what you think they should do to prepare?
There aren't a lot of public announcements from departments of revenue on this issue, but what there is a lot of head shaking when you get a bunch of tax administrators in a room and one of them has the courage to talk about what they're going to start doing. You see a lot of other people shaking their heads. Yes. Kansas just recently announced that they've already started sending letters out to a very large database of remote sellers who aren't collecting Kansas sales tax. California, they're still actively, suing is not the right word. They're actively enforcing the old physical presence rules for folks that use warehousing systems in California. Just saw a letter ruling this week from Washington, where Washington had issued a ruling saying that somebody who had used a fulfillment center in Washington for several years owed back sales taxes and back B&O taxes on that. The rule in for the 10 years I went to the legislature and tried to get them to give me more money to administer the sales tax in South Dakota. The rule always was, what are you doing to collect the tax now? Explain to me what your resources are being used for. I'm not going to give you another auditor. I'm not going to give you anything else unless you can tell me you're doing a really good job with the money I've already given you. And so that's where compliance comes in and enforcement comes in. I have to be able to, before someone who runs a sales tax in the state can go to the legislature and ask for more money to do whatever, they have to prove that they're enforcing the laws that exist with the resources they have. And we should start to expect that in this new environment.
Yeah, and I guess
go ahead. Nope, go ahead.
I guess just to follow up on that, customers or clients not knowing kind of where they stand in the state, if you will. The unique thing about the SST program is prior to early of 2019, the SST program required a customer to sign up in all 24 states. And something unique post Wayfair is they now have the ability to sign up in as many states as they want. They can pick and choose. They could sign up for their home state or the neighboring state upon initial registration, and then down the road, if they met the economic nexus thresholds, they can then add that state to their filing through the SST program, and that would be free of charge. So there is a unique opportunity for customers to utilize the SST program to get registered in the states that they need to, and then prospectively to get registered in any states that they come up on the economic nexus thresholds.
Yes. The one point I wanted to touch on that Scott was talking about, what states are doing to proactively enforce laws on the books, is that it's easier to sell to the constituents increased audit enforcement if it's not on them. So it's easier for states to sell audit enforcement if they're enforcing outsiders, other businesses not located in that state, enforcing the sales tax laws on them. So auditing out-of-state businesses is going to be huge for every state, because they look at it as it doesn't impact their constituents. It's bringing money and revenue in from out of state for businesses that are competing within state businesses. So that's great for whatever state you live in, but think now, all the other states are going to be doing the same thing. So if you're doing business in other states, you really need to be on top of whether or not you have nexus and need to be collecting tax. Am I right?
You're absolutely right. It's easy to sell to a legislature and into the general public that the real problem with tax compliance are the people outside the state that aren't fairly competing with people inside the state. That's an easy sell.
Mm-hmm.
It's and honestly, most, if you look at the, and there's probably 2 generations worth of research on this, of ballot issues. If you propose the tax increase to people and you do so for a very specific, widely popular issue, more times than not, the people will vote a tax increase on themselves to pay for that. They don't vote for tax increases on the promise that I'm going to do something better. And often they don't vote for tax cuts if someone is capable of convincing them that the thing that they like that the government does will get cut along with it.
Okay, we're nearing the end of our time, and Chad, I wanted to give you a chance to share some of your resources. I have up the training.avalara.com webpage for streamlined sales tax training. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Monthly, we offer an SST onboarding webinar, which can be found in our Avalara University, which Holly has in front of us here. You can go ahead and sign up for a live class, and we do answer questions, have a Q&A session within the live webinar on a monthly basis. If you need to interact and ask questions specific to your business. Otherwise, we do have a pre-recorded version that you can watch on your own. And I wanted to touch on, if you're interested in joining the SST program, our new customers, the lead time right now with the influx of customers that we're getting is generally 45 to 60 days to implement. And if you're already with Avalara, that implementation can be much quicker than the 45 to 60 day turnaround. And we offer 700 plus integrations to get your ERP system married up with our AvaTax system. And like I said, we have 2,500 plus tax codes that are SST certified. And that's what I have for you.
Awesome. And I have on my page right now different links to get the process started, some Q&A information about joining Streamline, joining Avalara, and about Streamline Sales Tax from Avalara's website. And I will send those out to everyone so that they have the information and the actual links instead of just watching it on the screen. And I want to thank both you, Scott and Chad, for joining me today and talking about this. I just know so many people have questions about this. I don't think we can talk about it enough, and I don't think people realize how important it is, how difficult it is to comply. We get it. It's worth the investment, and I think enforcement actions are coming in 2021 for sure.
Thank you, Holly. It's
Very
been a
good.
pleasure.
Thank you.
All right. Don't forget to join us next week. We have Representative John Mako on to talk about sales tax simplification. And then December 8th, we have Dan McGinnity from McGinnity and Associates to talk about commercial real estate trends. And then December 15th, for those of you interested in multi-state tax issues, we have Craig Johnson, the Executive Director of the Streamline Sales Tax Governing Board. He's coming back on 10 on Tuesdays, and he has some news to share with us that day. To rewatch this episode or to view previous episodes of 10 on Tuesdays, make sure to go to salesandincomeTax.com. Check out the 10 on Tuesday channel. I'm in the process of updating my website, so look for that in the future. And thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you all next week. Thank you.